The great halls of Nexus Prime had stood for over 50,000 years, and in all that time, the 12 elder species had never once been challenged in any meaningful way. Ambassador Elena Vasquez walked through those ancient corridors with her delegation of 7 humans, their footsteps echoing against walls made of stone that predated human civilization by millennia. She had been a soldier once, a commander who had seen the worst of what war could bring, and she had learned long ago that true strength was not found in weapons or ships, but in the ability to remain calm when everyone expected you to break. Today would test that lesson. The council chamber opened before them like the mouth of some great beast, circular and vast, with seating for thousands of observers from hundreds of species. At the center stood 12 towering platforms, each one holding a representative of the elder species who had ruled this galaxy since before humanity had discovered fire. Elena took her place at the small podium reserved for what the council called developmental species, and she noticed how it sat lower than the others, forcing her to look up at those who considered themselves her betters. High Arbiter Kethvorin of the Dominion rose from his platform, his 4 arms spread wide in a gesture that might have seemed welcoming if not for the cold satisfaction in his 3 eyes. He was ancient even by the standards of his long-lived species, and he had made no secret of his contempt for humanity ever since first contact 80 years ago. We gather today to discuss the continued integration of younger species into our galactic community, he announced, his voice carrying through the chamber without any need for amplification, and to address certain imbalances that have developed over recent decades. Elena kept her expression neutral, even as she felt the tension ripple through her delegation. They had come expecting a trade renegotiation, perhaps some minor adjustments to shipping routes or tariff schedules. The look on Kethvorin's face told her this would be something far worse. The Council has determined that certain developmental species have expanded beyond their appropriate boundaries. The High Arbiter continued, and though he did not look directly at Elena, every being in the chamber knew exactly who he meant, and we have therefore drafted a series of necessary restrictions to ensure stability and proper growth. He gestured, and holographic text appeared in the air above the chamber, scrolling through page after page of new regulations. Elena read them with growing disbelief. Human colonial expansion would be capped at current levels, with no new settlements permitted without council approval that everyone knew would never come. All human technological developments would be subject to mandatory sharing with elder species, though curiously this sharing would only flow in one direction. Human trade routes would face new taxation rates that would make most of them economically unviable. And perhaps most insulting of all, human military vessels would be integrated into Council defense fleets, effectively placing them under alien command. These measures, Kethvorin said with what he probably thought was a reassuring tone, are for the benefit of all species, including humanity, as they will prevent the instability that comes from too rapid development. Elena felt the eyes of thousands upon her, waiting to see how the humans would react to being told they were children who needed supervision. She had served under commanders who would have erupted in fury at such treatment. She had known politicians who would have groveled and accepted anything to avoid conflict. She did neither. The Terran Union requests 24 hours to consult with our government before responding, she said, her voice calm and professional. Kethvorin's mandibles clicked in what passed for a smile among his kind. Of course, Ambassador, take your time to consider our generous terms, though I trust you understand that these measures have already been approved by the full Council and are not subject to negotiation. Elena simply nodded and led her delegation out of the chamber. She did not look back, did not show any sign of the cold anger building in her chest. They walked in silence through the corridors until they reached the human embassy, a modest building that seemed almost deliberately small compared to the grand structures surrounding it. Only when the doors closed behind them did Alina allow herself to speak. "Get me a secure channel to Earth," she said to her communications officer. "Priority 1, directly to the Secretary General." It took only moments to establish the connection, and then the face of Marcus Chen appeared on the screen. He was a small man with gray hair and kind eyes, a former historian who had spent his life studying how empires rose and fell. He had been elected to lead the Terran Union because people trusted his judgment, and in 6 years, he had never given them reason to regret that trust. "Ambassador," he said, "I have been monitoring the session. Tell me your assessment." Alina took a breath before answering. "They are not negotiating, sir. They are dictating, and they fully expect us to accept because they believe we have no other choice." Chen was quiet for a long moment, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. "Did they leave any room for compromise?" "No, sir." "Did they offer any justification beyond their own authority?" "No, sir." "Did they show any indication that they view us as partners rather than subordinates?" Alina thought of the lowered podium, of Kethvorin's condescending smile, of the way the other elder species had watched the proceedings with bored indifference, as if the fate of 8 billion humans was barely worth their attention. "No, sir, they did not." Chen nodded slowly, and something shifted in his expression, a hardening that Alina had never seen before. "I spent 30 years studying the fall of empires," he said, "and do you know what I learned, Ambassador?" "Tell me, sir." "Every empire that ever fell believed it was eternal, and every empire that ever fell made the same mistake. They confused fear with loyalty and obedience with respect, and they never understood the difference until it was too late." He leaned forward, his eyes meeting hers through the screen. "The Council believes we need them more than they need us, and they believe that because they have never bothered to look closely at what humanity actually contributes to this galaxy. So tomorrow, Ambassador, you will teach them a lesson that should have been obvious from the start." "What lesson is that, sir?" Marcus Chen smiled, and there was no warmth in it at all. "That humanity does not bluff, and that we would rather walk alone in the darkness than kneel in someone else's light." Alina felt something shift inside her, some final hesitation falling away. "What are your orders, Secretary General?" "Return to the Council tomorrow and inform them that the Terran Union formally withdraws from all treaties, all agreements, and all cooperative ventures with the Galactic Council, effective immediately. And then, Ambassador, you and your delegation will walk out of that chamber and you will not look back." "Sir, they will think we are bluffing." "Let them," Chen replied. "Let them think whatever they want, and when they realize the truth, let them remember that they chose this, not us." The connection ended, and Alina stood in silence as the weight of what was coming settled over her. Tomorrow she would walk into that chamber and tear apart 80 years of careful diplomacy, with a few simple words. Tomorrow she would bet the future of humanity on the belief that the galaxy needed them more than they needed the galaxy. Tomorrow she would find out if Marcus Chen was right. She thought of her grandmother, who had survived the food riots of 2089, and her mother, who had helped build the first colony ship, and all the generations of stubborn humans who had refused to accept that their place was at the bottom of any hierarchy. And she smiled. Let the Council think what they wanted. Tomorrow, humanity would remind the galaxy what it meant to underestimate Earth. The morning came too quickly, and Alina found that she had not slept at all. She stood before the mirror in her quarters and straightened her formal uniform, the deep blue fabric carrying the simple star emblem of the Terran Union. Her hands were steady, which surprised her. She had expected to feel fear or doubt, or at least some hesitation about what she was about to do. Instead, she felt only a strange clarity, like a soldier who has accepted that the battle is coming and finds peace in that acceptance. Her delegation gathered in the embassy lobby, 7 humans who had volunteered for what might be the most important diplomatic mission in their species' history. They were young and old, men and women, scientists and soldiers and bureaucrats who had spent their careers building bridges between humanity and the stars. Today they would burn those bridges to ash. "You all know what we are about to do," Alina said, looking at each of them in turn. "And you all know that there will be no going back, so if anyone wishes to remain here, I will not think less of you." No one moved. No one spoke. They simply stood and waited for her to lead them forward. Alina felt a surge of pride that nearly broke through her careful composure. This was humanity, she thought, not the ships or the colonies or the technology, but this stubborn refusal to abandon each other even when the path ahead led into darkness. "Then let us go make history," she said, and she led them out into the streets of Nexus Prime. The council chamber was even more crowded than the day before. Word had spread that the humans would be delivering their response, and observers from hundreds of species had packed the galleries to witness what they expected to be a humiliating capitulation. Alina could see the satisfaction in their eyes, the smug certainty that the young upstart species would finally learn their place. She walked to the low podium and stood in silence until the murmuring crowd fell quiet. High Arbiter Kethforin looked down at her, with an expression that mixed boredom with faint amusement. "Ambassador Vasquez," he said, "we trust that your government has had sufficient time to consider the Council's generous terms. Do you have a response for this assembly?" Alina reached into her pocket and withdrew a small data chip, placing it on the podium before her. "I do, High Arbiter." She had practiced this speech a dozen times during the sleepless night, trimming away every unnecessary word until only the essential remained. "The Terran Union has reviewed the proposed developmental restrictions," she began, her voice clear and calm, "and we have determined that they are incompatible with our fundamental principles of sovereignty, dignity, and mutual respect." A ripple of surprise moved through the chamber, but Kethforin merely clicked his mandibles in dismissal. "Such concerns can be addressed through proper channels," he said. "Perhaps some minor modifications might be arranged if humanity demonstrates appropriate cooperation." "You misunderstand me, High Arbiter." Alina picked up the data chip and held it up for the chamber to see. "This chip contains formal notification of the Terran Union's immediate withdrawal from all existing treaties, agreements, and cooperative ventures with the Galactic Council, all 2,847 of them, as well as termination notices for 12,000 active trade contracts and recall orders for all human personnel currently serving in joint operations across the galaxy." The silence that followed was absolute. Kethforin stared at her with all 3 eyes, and for the first time since she had known him, he seemed genuinely uncertain. "This is absurd," he finally said, a harsh edge creeping into his voice. "You cannot simply withdraw from the galactic community. Where would you go? What would you do?" "We will go home," Alina replied. "And we will do what humanity has always done. We will survive, we will build, and we will remember those who treated us with respect and those who did not." "This is theatrical posturing," Kethforin snapped, rising to his full height on his platform. "You are attempting to negotiate through dramatics, but I assure you, Ambassador, the Council does not respond to childish tantrums." Alina looked up at him, and she felt the weight of history pressing down upon her shoulders. 80 years of humanity struggling for acceptance, 80 years of being told they were too young and too primitive, and too insignificant to deserve a voice. It ended here. "The Terran Union does not posture, High Arbiter," she said, and her voice carried to every corner of that ancient chamber. "We do not bluff, we do not threaten, we simply make decisions and follow through on them. and we have decided that we will no longer accept a place in a community that treats us as lesser beings." She stepped back from the podium. "You will not hear from us again until you are ready to treat us as equals." And then she turned and walked toward the exit. Behind her, she heard her delegation fall into step, 7 pairs of human footsteps echoing through the stunned silence. She did not look back at the council platforms. She did not acknowledge the gasps and whispers spreading through the galleries. She simply walked, one foot in front of the other, toward the massive doors at the far end of the chamber. The walk seemed to take forever. Each step felt like a statement, a declaration that humanity would not be broken by contempt or crushed by condescension. She could feel the eyes of thousands upon her, species who had ruled this galaxy for longer than humanity had existed, watching in disbelief as 8 small figures rejected everything they had to offer. The doors opened before her, and she stepped through into the corridor beyond. Only when those doors closed behind her did she allow herself to breathe. "Ambassador," one of her aides whispered, his voice shaking, "did we just do what I think we did?" "We did," Alina confirmed, and she was surprised to find that she was smiling. "Now let us go home before they realize we were serious." Back in the chamber, chaos was beginning to spread. Species that had watched with amusement were now arguing among themselves, trying to understand what had just happened. High Arbiter Kethvorin stood frozen on his platform, his mandibles working silently as he processed the magnitude of what the humans had done. A voice cut through the noise, calm and measured. It belonged to Ambassador Sethan of the Rithani, a species that had always been more sympathetic to younger races than most of the council. "High Arbiter," Sethan said, "I feel compelled to point out that in 80 years of contact, humanity has never once made a threat they did not carry out. They do not bluff." Kethvorin turned to face him with barely contained fury. "They are children throwing a tantrum," he snarled. "They will return within 1 cycle, begging for readmission, and when they do, the terms will be far less generous." Sethan said nothing more, but his expression suggested he was far from convinced. Across the galaxy, human ships were already receiving their orders. Freighters abandoned half-loaded cargo at alien ports. Engineers packed their tools and walked away from infrastructure projects that had taken years to build. Doctors said goodbye to patients they had treated for decades. Soldiers quietly collected their belongings from barracks on worlds they had helped defend. Thousands of vessels, from massive colony ships to tiny personal craft, began plotting courses for home. The largest coordinated withdrawal in galactic history was underway. And in the council chamber, the elder species watched with smug satisfaction. Let the humans leave, they thought. The galaxy had existed for billions of years, before humanity crawled out of their caves. It would continue to exist long after they were forgotten. They could not have been more wrong. 3 months after the humans walked out of the council chamber, the galaxy began to understand just how badly it had miscalculated. It started with small things, inconveniences that the elder species dismissed as temporary adjustments. A shipment of medical supplies arrived late to a colony world, and 3 patients died while waiting. A communications relay failed in a distant sector, and no one came to repair it for weeks. A trade route that had operated smoothly for decades suddenly became plagued by delays and rising costs. The council assured everyone that these were minor disruptions, easily resolved once replacement systems were put in place. But the disruptions did not stop. They multiplied. The truth that no one had wanted to admit was that humanity had quietly become essential to the functioning of galactic civilization. Not through conquest or threat or any grand design, but simply through hard work and reliability. Human shipping companies had grown to handle 40% of all interstellar freight, not because they were the fastest or the most advanced, but because they showed up on time and charged fair prices. Human engineers had taken on maintenance of aging infrastructure that the elder species considered beneath their dignity, and they had done it so well that everyone had forgotten the systems needed maintenance at all. Human agricultural worlds had become the breadbasket of 200 systems, whose own ecosystems had been destroyed by millennia of exploitation. Human pharmaceutical companies had developed treatments for diseases that the elder species had simply learned to live with. And now billions of aliens depended on medications that no one else knew how to produce. Within weeks of the withdrawal, shipping costs across the galaxy tripled. Freighters from elder species demanded premium rates to carry cargo they had previously ignored, and many routes were simply abandoned as unprofitable. Colonies that had grown dependent on regular supply runs found themselves waiting months for ships that might never arrive. The Marevni Collective was the first to face a genuine crisis. Their homeworld had exhausted its arable land centuries ago, and for the past 50 years they had imported nearly all their food from human agricultural colonies. They had stockpiles, of course, but those stockpiles had been calculated based on the assumption that trade would continue. 3 months into the silence, they began rationing. The Vethkai faced a different kind of disaster. They were a proud warrior species who had never shown weakness to anyone, but 30% of their population suffered from a chronic degenerative condition that had plagued them for millennia. Human doctors had developed a treatment that managed the symptoms, and human factories produced the medication in quantities that the Vethkai could not hope to match. Their stockpile would last 8 months. After that, millions would begin to suffer and die. High Arbiter Kethvorin received reports of these crises and dismissed them as exaggerations. The galaxy had survived for 50,000 years under Council rule, and it would survive this minor inconvenience as well. Then the raiders came. Humanity's military had never been particularly impressive by galactic standards, but they had taken on a task that no one else wanted, patrolling the outer rim territories where piracy and banditry had flourished since before recorded history. They had done it not for glory or recognition, but simply because someone needed to do it and no one else would. With the human patrols gone, the raiders returned with a vengeance. 3 colony worlds were sacked in the first month. Dozens more reported attacks on shipping and infrastructure. Species that had enjoyed decades of peace suddenly found themselves hearing mercenaries or building warships they had not needed for generations. The Council dispatched its own forces to restore order, but the elder species had grown comfortable in their dominance. Their fleets were designed for intimidation rather than patrol work, massive dreadnoughts that could destroy worlds but could not be bothered to chase down small-time pirates in remote sectors. Every attempt to fill the gap left by humanity only highlighted how large that gap truly was. Ambassador Sethan of the Rithani requested an emergency session of the Council to address what he called the cascading failure of galactic infrastructure. He presented data compiled by his own analysts, and what it showed was terrifying. Human workers had filled positions across every sector of the galactic economy, not because they were the most skilled or the most capable, but because they were willing to take on jobs that others considered beneath them. They had become the foundation upon which the entire system rested, and no one had noticed because no one had bothered to look. "We must contact the humans," Sethan urged. "We must find a way to resolve this crisis before it destroys everything we have built." Kethvorin rose to respond, and though his voice was steady, there was something in his eyes that had not been there 3 months ago. "The humans are welcome to return at any time," he said. "They know where to find us. They need only accept the terms we have offered and all will be forgiven." "High Arbiter," Sethan pressed, "with respect, perhaps we should consider revising those terms. The current situation suggests that we may have underestimated humanity's importance to our civilization. We will not be blackmailed by a species that has existed for less than a cosmic eye blink, Kethforin snapped. If they wish to suffer in isolation, that is their choice. We will adapt and move forward. That night, Kethforin sent a private message to Earth. It was carefully worded to sound like a generous offer rather than a request, suggesting that the Council might be willing to clarify certain aspects of the developmental restrictions if humanity would agree to begin preliminary discussions. The response came back almost instantly. It was an automated message, and it contained only one line. The Terran Union is not accepting communications from Council-affiliated entities at this time. Kethforin stared at that message for a very long time. He had ruled over thousands of species for centuries, and not once in all that time had anyone refused to speak with him. Not once had anyone simply ignored him, as if he did not matter. For the first time since the humans had walked out, something cold began to form in his chest. It was not anger or frustration. It was something he had not felt in so long that he almost did not recognize it. It was fear. Across the galaxy, in the Sol system that had given birth to humanity, life continued. The transition had not been easy, and there had been sacrifices that weighed heavily on those who had made them. Human businesses that had depended on galactic trade had struggled, and some had failed. Families had been separated as workers returned home from distant worlds. The economy had contracted by 12% in the first quarter, and experts had warned of worse to come. But something remarkable was happening. Without the galaxy to depend on, humanity had turned inward. Colonies that had exported food began feeding their own people first. Factories that had produced goods for alien markets shifted to serving human needs. Engineers who had maintained alien infrastructure came home and began building new systems from scratch. The Terran Union was becoming self-sufficient in a way it had not been since before first contact. And in the halls of government, Secretary General Marcus Chen reviewed the reports and allowed himself a small smile. "They still think we are coming back," he said to Alina, who had returned home to serve as his senior advisor. "They do," she confirmed. "Every analysis they produce assumes that we must eventually accept their terms because we cannot survive without them. Then they still do not understand us." Chen turned to look out the window at the blue sky of Earth, the world where humanity had been born, and where humanity would endure no matter what the galaxy threw at them. "We are stubborn," he said. "We are patient, and we are very good at doing without. They built an empire on the belief that everyone needs them, but we do not. And when they finally realize that, everything will change. And if they never realize it..." Chen shrugged. "Then we build our own future without them. We have done it before. We can do it again." Out among the stars, the silence from Earth continued. And in that silence, the galaxy began to crack. 6 months after the humans walked away, the Galactic Council was no longer laughing. The Morevni had begun evacuating their outer colonies, unable to feed populations that had grown dependent on imported grain that was no longer coming. The Vethkai had started rationing their medication, cutting doses in half to stretch their supplies, and their hospitals were filling with patients whose condition was deteriorating faster than anyone had predicted. 14 species had formally requested emergency assistance from the Council, and the Council had nothing to give them. In the corridors of power on Nexus Prime, accusations flew like weapons. Elder species blamed each other for failing to anticipate the crisis. Younger species blamed the elder for provoking it in the first place. And everywhere the same question was being asked with increasing desperation. Why had no one realized how important the humans were? Ambassador Sethan of the Rithani had spent months compiling evidence, and what he had found kept him awake at night. Humanity had never sought dominance or control. They had simply seen jobs that needed doing and done them. They had built no empire, claimed no territory, made no demands. They had just worked, day after day, year after year, until their labor had become the invisible framework holding everything together. And the council had rewarded them by treating them like servants who should be grateful for the privilege of serving. "We were fools," Sethan told the emergency session he had demanded. "We saw their humility as weakness. We saw their willingness to work as proof that they belonged beneath us, and we never stopped to ask what would happen if they simply stopped." High Arbiter Kethforin sat in his place of honor, but there was no honor left in his bearing. His scales had lost their luster, and his eyes carried a weariness that made him look older than his centuries. "What would you have us do?" he asked, and his voice held none of its former arrogance. "They will not answer our communications. They will not receive our envoys. They have made it clear that they want nothing from us." "Then we must give them something they have not asked for," Sethan replied. "We must admit that we were wrong." The chamber erupted in protest. Elder species did not admit fault to younger ones. It was a fundamental principle of the hierarchy that had governed the galaxy for millennia. To suggest otherwise was to threaten the very foundations of everything they believed. But Sethan stood firm against the storm. "Look at us," he shouted over the noise. "Look at what we have become. We are supposed to be the wisest and most advanced civilizations in existence, and we are falling apart because one species decided to stop helping us. Is this the legacy we want? Is this the future we are building?" No one had an answer. In the weeks that followed, the council tried everything it could think of to break the human silence. A formal diplomatic delegation was dispatched to the border of Terran space, carrying offers of revised terms that still fell far short of what the humans had demanded. A single patrol ship met them at the boundary, and a young human officer politely informed them that they were not authorized to proceed further. The delegation argued, then pleaded, then threatened. The officer simply repeated that they were not authorized to proceed and wished them a safe journey home. Council intelligence services attempted to infiltrate human space, hoping to gather information or perhaps make contact with sympathetic elements within the Terran government. Every single agent was detected, detained, and returned to Council space within days. Each one carried the same handwritten note, signed by Secretary General Chen himself. "Please do not do this again. We have been patient, but our patience is not infinite." The message was clear. Humanity did not want to talk. They would wait until the council was ready to listen. In desperation, Kethforin ordered the unsealing of archives that had been closed for millennia. Somewhere in the council's vast historical records, there had to be something that could help them understand what had gone wrong. What he found instead was a document that chilled him to his core. It had been written 80 years ago, shortly after first contact with humanity, by a council strategic assessment team. Their mission had been to evaluate the new species and recommend how the council should approach them. The report was thorough and prophetic. Humanity is not a juvenile species in any meaningful sense, it concluded. They are merely young in their development, but the speed of that development is unprecedented in recorded galactic history. In less than 4 centuries, they progressed from primitive combustion engines to faster-than-light travel, reverse engineering technology that required other species thousands of years to develop. The report went on to warn that attempting to restrict or control humanity would be catastrophic. They are too adaptable, too resilient, and too numerous to be effectively contained. Any attempt to do so will only convince them that the galactic community is their enemy rather than their partner. The recommended strategy was integration. Make humanity essential to galactic civilization. Tie them so deeply into existing structures that they would have no reason to rebel. If they feel valued and respected, they will become our greatest allies. If they feel threatened or diminished, they will become a force that could shake the foundations of everything we have built. Kethforin read that report 3 times before setting it down. The council had followed the recommendation perfectly. They had made humanity essential. But they had forgotten the second part. They had failed to make humanity feel valued. They had failed to show respect. And now the galaxy was paying the price. A junior analyst named Vethkorian approached Kethforin with a data tablet clutched in her trembling hands. "High Arbiter," she said, "I have completed the projections you requested." Kethforin took the tablet and studied the figures. At current rates, galactic GDP would decline by 30% within 2 years. 3 species would face extinction-level crises within 18 months. The Council's authority, already weakened by the crisis, would likely collapse within 5 years as more and more species sought alternatives. And humanity. The projections showed that the Terran Union's economy had stabilized after an initial contraction. They were growing again, slowly but steadily, building new trade relationships with species outside the Council structure. They were not just surviving. They were thriving. They planned for this, Vethkorian whispered. They knew what would happen and they prepared. Kethforin set down the tablet and closed his eyes. 80 years ago, his predecessors had looked at humanity and seen potential, and they had tried to harness that potential for the Council's benefit. They had succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. And in doing so, they had created the very threat they had hoped to prevent. The humans did not need the galaxy. The galaxy needed them. And until the Council was willing to accept that truth, the silence would continue. In the Sol system, Secretary General Chen received reports of the Council's growing desperation. He read them without satisfaction, because there was no joy in watching others suffer, even those who had earned that suffering through arrogance and contempt. "How long do we wait?" Alina asked him. "As long as it takes," Chen replied. "We did not do this to punish them, we did this to teach them, and the lesson is not over until they truly understand what it means. And if they never learn." Chen looked out at the stars that had once seemed so welcoming, and now held only silence and waiting. "Then we find those who will learn," he said. "We build something new, something better, and we invite everyone except those who refuse to change." He turned back to his desk, and the mountain of work waiting for him. "The galaxy had 50,000 years to get it right," he said. "They failed. Perhaps it is time for someone else to try." Across the void, the Council continued to fracture. And in the darkness between stars, a new order was beginning to take shape. 1 year after the humans walked away, the galaxy received a message that changed everything. It did not come from the Galactic Council, and it was not addressed to the Council. It went directly to every species in known space, delivered simultaneously to governments and populations that had spent 12 months watching their civilization slowly collapse. The message was from Secretary General Marcus Chen, and it contained an invitation. "The Terran Union is hosting a summit to discuss the future of interstellar cooperation," it read. "All species are welcome, the Council is welcome, but the Council does not speak for you unless you let it. Come to Earth. Let us talk about what we can build together." Within hours, 847 species had confirmed their attendance. Some were desperate, facing crises that only human assistance could solve. Some were curious, wondering what the humans were planning after a year of silence. And some were hopeful, daring to believe that maybe, after 50,000 years, something could finally change. High Arbiter Kethforin received the invitation in his private chambers. He had aged visibly over the past year, the weight of failure pressing down on shoulders that had once carried the authority of the entire galaxy. His advisors urged him to refuse, to denounce the summit as an illegitimate challenge to Council authority. He listened to them in silence, then dismissed them and sat alone with his thoughts. For 50,000 years, the council had ruled through a simple principle. The elder species knew best. They had survived longer, achieved more, and therefore deserved to lead. Younger species existed to serve, to learn, and eventually, if they proved worthy, to be granted a measure of respect. It had seemed so obvious, so natural, so right. And it had been wrong. Kethforin thought about the report he had found in the sealed archives, the warning that his predecessors had ignored. He thought about the faces of the humans as they had walked out of his chamber, not angry or bitter, just determined. He thought about the billions of beings across the galaxy who were suffering, because he had been too proud to treat one species as equals. And he made a decision that no High Arbiter had made in the entire history of the Council. He decided to go to Earth. The summit was held in Geneva, in a building that humans called the Palace of Nations. It had been constructed centuries ago to house an organization dedicated to international cooperation, and though that organization had long since been superseded, the building remained as a symbol of humanity's belief that different peoples could work together for common good. Secretary General Chen stood at the podium and looked out at the largest gathering of species in galactic history. They filled the vast assembly hall and spilled out into the corridors and plazas beyond, representatives of civilizations that had never before been in the same room. He saw fear in some faces, hope in others, and curiosity in almost all. He began to speak, and his words carried to every corner of that ancient building. 1 year ago, the Terran Union withdrew from the Galactic Council because we were told that our place was at the bottom, that our contributions were insignificant, and that our dignity did not matter. He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the assembly. We did not leave because we hated the Council or wanted revenge. We left because we believe that cooperation can only exist between equals, and we will not pretend otherwise just to avoid conflict. He gestured to the data screens that lined the walls, displaying text in hundreds of languages. Today we present to you an alternative. We call it the Terran Accords, and it is built on principles that should have guided galactic civilization from the beginning. The Accords were simple in their design, but revolutionary in their implications. Every species would have equal voting weight, regardless of age or power or technological achievement. There would be no developmental restrictions, no mandatory technology sharing, no taxes designed to benefit some at the expense of others. Trade would be free, defense would be mutual for those who chose to participate, and disputes would be resolved through arbitration rather than dictation. We do not ask you to follow us, Chen continued. We do not claim to have all the answers. We simply offer a different way forward, one where respect is given rather than demanded, and where every voice matters. He stepped back from the podium. The choice is yours. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Ambassador Sethan of the Rithani rose from his seat and walked to the front of the chamber. The Rithani accept the Terran Accords, he announced, and we thank humanity for showing us that change is possible. One by one, other species followed. The Marevni, the Chelxi, the Vordani, dozens and then hundreds of civilizations rising to declare their support. The hall filled with a sound that had rarely been heard in galactic politics. Applause. Finally, only one delegation remained seated. High Arbiter Kethforin sat in his place, surrounded by representatives of the elder species who had ruled the galaxy for so long. His advisors leaned close, whispering urgently. Some urged him to denounce the Accords and rally the remaining loyal species. Others suggested a strategic retreat, accepting the Accords now and working to undermine them later. Kethforin ignored them all. He rose from his seat and walked slowly toward the front of the chamber, each step carrying the weight of millennia. The crowd fell silent as he approached the podium where Chen waited. The two leaders stood face to face, the ancient ruler of a crumbling empire and the quiet historian who had dared to imagine something better. Kethforin looked out at the assembly, at the hope in their eyes, at the weariness in the faces of his own people. And he did something that no high arbiter had ever done. He bowed. "The Dominion accepts the Terran Accords," he said, his voice heavy with emotion he had not felt in centuries. "And I offer my personal apology to the Terran Union and to all the species we have failed. We underestimated humanity. We underestimated all of you, and that failure is ours alone." The chamber erupted. Species that had been enemies embraced each other. Delegates wept openly as they realized that the galaxy they had known was ending, and something new was being born. Chen stepped forward and placed a hand on Kethforin's shoulder. "We do not want your submission," he said quietly. "We want your partnership. The galaxy needs what your people have learned over 50,000 years. Help us build something worthy of that wisdom." Kethforin looked at him with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of countless civilizations. "Why?" he asked. "After everything we did to you, why would you offer us a place in your new order?" Chen smiled. "Because this was never about revenge," he said. "It was about proving that things can change, and you just proved it by being here." In the months that followed, the Terran Accords were ratified by 90% of known species. The Galactic Council did not disappear, but it transformed, becoming one voice among many rather than the only voice that mattered. Humanity did not become the new rulers of the galaxy. When species asked them to take on leadership roles, they politely refused. "We did not do this to replace one hierarchy with another," Chen explained. "We did it to show that the galaxy does not need hierarchies at all." Years later, when Ambassador Elena Vasquez had grown old and was preparing to retire from public life, a young alien journalist sought her out for an interview. "Ambassador," the journalist asked, "after everything that happened, what would you say is humanity's greatest strength? What allowed you to change the galaxy when so many others had failed?" Elena thought for a long time before answering. She remembered the fear she had felt walking into the council chamber that day, and the certainty that had replaced it when she turned her back on the most powerful beings in the galaxy. She remembered the long months of silence, and the longer months of building something new from the ashes of something broken. She remembered all the humans who had sacrificed and struggled and refused to give up, not because they knew they would win, but because giving up was simply not who they were. "We are not stronger than other species," she finally said. "We are not smarter or more advanced. We are just stubborn enough to walk away from a bad deal, patient enough to wait for a better one, and foolish enough to believe that things can change." She smiled at the memory of all they had accomplished. "The galaxy called that bluffing. We called it principle, and in the end, principle won." The journalist nodded and recorded her words, knowing that they would be studied and quoted for generations to come. Outside the window, ships from 100 worlds passed through skis that had once belonged to humanity alone. The stars that had seemed so distant were now filled with friends and partners, and fellow travelers on the long journey toward something better. Humanity had walked away from the galaxy, and the